Welcome to the Diary of a Pan-African Preacher. The Queen of Sheba is reported to have said, "Wisdom is sweeter than honey, brings more joy than wine, illumines more than the sun, is more precious than jewels." As we come towards the close of 2024, I find myself extremely encouraged by the rising involvement of African women on the national, continental, and global stages. While the rise of women in leadership across Africa marks a significant and necessary shift, there is still a long road to go, or a long way to go, in gaining gender parity. For example, women's representation in African parliaments have increased by 1% or 1 percentage point from 26% in 2021 to 26% in 2024. We do know that once there are women representatives in our parliaments, they can help women to formulate legislation and foster democracies more inclusive of women's interests. However, at the current rate of progress, it will take another 100 years to arrive at gender parity in Africa. 100 years ago, Dr. James Emmanuel Aggrey, one of Africa's famous educators, said, "If you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a nation." He identified then a link between female education as a determinant for national development. Africa, like other parts of the world, is still struggling with gender parity in the workplace. The idea that a country can function to its optimum without upskilling half of its population is a mystery to me. As you no doubt aware, this Pan-African preacher elevates the African proverb as sacred texts of African traditional societies and African traditional religions. We recognize that all sacred texts are created with particular historical, cultural contexts. We therefore need to be honest and acknowledge there are biases against women in African societies that are encapsulated in our African proverbs. Though that is so, it is not the whole story or the end of the story. The liberation and empowerment of women are also lodged in our proverbs. So it is therefore the responsibility and duty of the griot, holy men, priestess, prophetess, prophet, pastor, preacher, rabbi, emir, to extrapolate the empowering and liberating aspects of the sacred canon for the elevation of our families, societies, peoples, and nations. There is undeniable progress in African women moving into leadership roles across industries, governments, and civil society. They are demonstrating the transformating power of inclusive and diverse leadership. Africa's challenge must be to address its own deep-seated cultural norms and systemic barriers to women advancement. So if there were 4 things I would recommend to African countries would be to 1, increase women's access to healthcare. 2, increase women's access to education, and in particular, STEM education for girls, yes, and for women. 3, increase access to farming extension services. for an increase in women's access to financial services. I look forward to getting some feedback from those who would suggest in addition to or differently. Ashe.